So-called water wars are on the rise worldwide, but the Teesta River conflict is one of the most contentious. A treaty between India and Bangladesh about their fair share of water has been pending for more than a decade. So, what's holding it up, and how is China involved? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Adrian Finighan. The Tista isn't just a river. For millions of people in India and Bangladesh, it's a lifeline, integral to the economy, food and income. A decades-old dispute revolves around the distribution of the Tista's waters, particularly during the dry season. Bangladesh wants a larger share than it currently has and is pushing for $1 billion megaproject to go ahead. But relations between Dhaka and New Delhi are at an all-time low since the ousting of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in August. She fled to India and has defied an arrest warrant to stand trial in Bangladesh for crimes against humanity. Hasina preferred India to fund the Teesta project, but the interim government in Bangladesh is reportedly keen on China. So why does India view Chinese involvement as a threat to its national security? And why is the Indian state of West Bengal opposed to the project? We'll get to those questions in just a few moments. But first, a report from Tanvir Chowdhury.
Thousands of people have gathered here on the bank of River Tista in Lalmonirhat. This is one of the several other gatherings in 5 different northern districts in Bangladesh. They're protesting about India's diversion and holding of water by building dam in 30 of the 54 shared rivers. Most people and the organizers want India to come to table and negotiate to an equal term of sharing the Teesta River water as well as the Ganges River water. Bangladesh has been in dispute with India for a long period since its inception in sharing river water. They came almost close to an agreement in 2011 under Sheikh Hasina, then Prime Minister, but the West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee refused to come to terms, saying that it will affect West Bengal if they share more water with Bangladesh.
Our movement is about the long suffering of people due to India's restrictions on the water from the Teesta River. We want our fair share of the river and assistance for the people who have suffered because of the environmental impact of water shortages, as well as the dredging of the river.
Many people here, including experts and some in the government, think they should go ahead and build a major project here that was designed by the Chinese to have a Tista dam and a mega project in northern Bangladesh to counter India's dam. Now that will have a diplomatic impact with India having Chinese personnel presence so close to Indian northern border. As it is, Bangladesh having a strain on the relationship that could make things much more complex. Tanvir Chowdhury, Al Jazeera, Lalmonirhat for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guests from Cambridge, Massachusetts. We're joined by Taqbir Huda, a Bangladeshi human rights lawyer and former South Asia regional researcher at Amnesty International. From Bergamo in Italy is Filippo Menga, an associate professor of geography at the University of Bergamo and the editor-in-chief of the journal Political Geography. And from New Delhi, we're joined by Vivek Katju, a former Indian diplomat and columnist. A welcome to you all, gentlemen. Let's start with you, Taqbir. What do you make of the protests we saw there in Tanvir's report? Why are passions running so high over this issue?
Thank you. So the tensions are running high precisely because this has been an unresolved issue for decades. The millions of farmers who are impacted by the lack of a water sharing treaty regarding the Teesta River have their livelihoods, their entire lives, their property impacted by the continued unilateral use and control of the water course by India. So this is really in the wider backdrop of the whole list of issues that people are finally able to mobilize on now that the 15 years of authoritarian rule has come to an end with the ouster of the former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. So this her policy, particularly in relation to India and in relation to the Tista, issue was seen as being entirely subservient to India's interests. So the people have, mobilized against that long-standing grievance, and they finally have, the political and civic space to do so.
Vivek, what do you make of what you just heard there? In 2011, an agreement between India and Bangladesh on the sharing of water from the Tista was drawn up, but it's been pending ever since. Why is that? Who's delaying and why?
As your report rightly stressed, sharing of waters between upper and lower riparian states is about the most difficult matter to resolve. And just as there are passions among the people in Bangladesh on the Teesta River, and indeed on other rivers which flow from India to Bangladesh, there are equally passions in India. And the government, both the central and the state governments, have to be aware and acknowledge these feelings, these popular feelings. So it would not be proper for anyone in Bangladesh to claim that they are being victimized. And the governments in India, the state and the central governments, can disregard the sentiments of the people there because livelihoods are involved there too. My own assessment is that India and Bangladesh have been able to resolve through the decades many contentious issues, including their boundary, both maritime and the physical boundary issues, economic issues, commercial issues. I know that our relations are going through a difficult phase at the moment, but I have no doubt that in course of time, these matters relating to waters, which are, as I said, about the most difficult in diplomacy, will also be addressed.
Filippo, I'll bring you in just a moment, but first let me throw that back to Taqbir. What do you make of what you just heard there? It's not fair of anyone in Bangladesh to claim that they're being victimized here.
I think that's a pretty reductionist view because, as any news coverage of Bangladesh in the recent years will tell you, that they are impacted by flooding just as recently as September 2024 when India had, made a release of the Tista watercourse without prior notification. It impacted about 100,000 people who were displaced because of severe flooding that happened at that time, and that unilateral use was exacerbating such flooding and it constricting their right to water during dry season when again India unilaterally decides to close the watercourse. So India's unilateral use and abuse of the watercourse directly impacts the human rights of the millions of farmers, their livelihood, their human right to water, and of course it impacts trade as well. There is about some estimations showing that about 8% of the rice crops of Bangladesh are impacted by this flooding and drying up. So of course, as you see, they have every reason to claim to be victimized, and it's potentially India's actions are potentially also against the Ganges Treaty which the two countries had signed in 1996, Article 9 of which said that the two countries would work together to uphold the no harm principle and fair use principle in relation to other common rivers. And India and Bangladesh have 54 such common rivers at least, and Tista being, of course, one of the most important. So it's not just a claim of victimization based on abstract notions of fairness. It's very much a violation of India's obligations under customary international law and even treaty law insofar as it relates to Ganges Treaty.
Okay, let's take a closer look at the Teesta River for a moment, which holds significant geopolitical and ecological importance. The river originates high up in the glaciers of the Himalayas. It flows for 414 kilometers through India's Sikkim and West Bengal states before entering Bangladesh and ending in the Bay of Bengal. It's the fourth largest river the two countries share and provides crucial water supplies for both. In Bangladesh, the Tista floodplain covers 14% of all farmland. More than 21 million people are directly or indirectly dependent upon the river for their livelihoods, especially during the dry season from December to March. In India, people in Sikkim and West Bengal depend upon the river for drinking water and agriculture and local industries. It's also vital to dozens of planned hydropower projects. Local governments fear that any water sharing with Bangladesh will leave their states dry and put those developments at risk. Filippo, in what state is the Teesta River at the moment?
Well, thanks for inviting me. The river is, as any other river, I will say, of course we're talking about the issue, but any conflict about water and about sharing a river is never only about water. We're talking about politics, social issues, economics, geopolitics, of course. This particular river has been heavily damped. As you have rightly said, it's largely over 2/3 of the river are in India, and India has dammed the river, for many reasons. But usually, you do dam a river such as the Tista to produce hydroelectricity, and so the production of energy, and then other strategical uses. The point here is that, the hosts have said that overall the two countries, India and Bangladesh, share 54 rivers. Bangladesh is downstream in all of those 54 rivers. Clearly, this gives a strategic advantage to India, as it would to any other country. And when it comes to sharing such a river, it is always quite a contentious matter. International water law is there. There is a convention called the UN 1992 Convention on the Sharing of Transboundary Water Courses. The issue here is that neither India and Bangladesh signed the UN Convention, and therefore they resort to bilateral talks and trying to find a bilateral agreement. But as it is always the case, it is quite complicated, because water, and we've seen it earlier, as a resource can lead to very emotional outcries and for very good reasons. And we're talking about a context that is heavily affected as well by climate change. And so Bangladesh as a country has been traditionally prone to floods, for instance, but then here we see something that it's counterintuitive, if you want, at least based on what people tend to think about South Asia, and it's an issue of water scarcity, and water scarcity particularly in the dry season. And this is because the river is heavily damped, and before that water can reach Bangladesh, it goes to many other communities and people and users and stakeholders. So the water is used for agriculture, is used for the production of energy, is used for civil uses. The problem is that there might not be enough water left for the downstream countries. And this is not something that is specific to this particular case. It's something that we can observe in many other contested rivers, particularly when they are densely populated and shared by two countries. Another point that I think is relevant here is that the two countries are not the same, right? We have one that is a major geopolitical power, and the other that clearly, there is an issue of power asymmetry also at stake.
Vivek, in what shape are relations between India and Bangladesh right now? You said that they were at a difficult point. New Delhi is yet to respond to Dhaka's request for the return of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who is being investigated on suspicion of crimes against humanity, genocide, murder, corruption, money laundering. Is that somehow playing into this dispute?
I think this is an old-standing issue between the two countries. It was there also in the time of Sheikh Hasina's prime ministership, and prior to that too. So I don't think it can be attributed only to Sheikh Hasina not being there in Bangladesh in power at this time. The relations are difficult, but I think in Delhi there is every desire to see that normalcy returns to the relationship. What I'm finding is that there are parties, there are forces within Bangladesh which are bent on trying to ensure that normalcy doesn't return to the relationship. India has tried its best the foreign minister, the external affairs minister, Jaishankar, met the foreign policy advisor only a couple of days ago in Oman on the sidelines of an international meeting. And there too he underlined that India's desire is to have good relations with Bangladesh, as indeed we want with all our neighbors, and Bangladesh is a very, very crucial neighbor. Over the years, if you see, India has done everything that it can in terms of economic ties, in terms of connectivity, and the only thing that India has asked of Bangladesh traditionally, and this is not something unique to India, is that Bangladesh should take care that India's security concerns are not jeopardized by any activities taking place on its soil. I think that's not something unnatural. So if you take all in all, things are moving well, were moving well. There's one other concern which we have, and that is that minorities in Bangladesh have been very severely and negatively impacted after Sheikh Hasina's ouster. And that is something of deep concern to a lot of people in India.
All right. Taqbir, what do you make of what you just heard there, that Bangladesh doesn't want to normalcy to return to the relationship between the two countries? I just wonder whether making any sort of deal right now with India, particularly over the Tista, is within the interim government's remit.
A couple of things there. Firstly, I think Bangladesh is, of course, willing to work cooperatively with India, but you must understand that this is a moment of transition where the interim government is trying to restore balance in a relationship which has highly been defined by, dynamics of domination and on India's side and subservience on Bangladesh's side. So, this is a necessary moment of rupture to restore equality, so to speak. In terms of the interim government's mandate, I mean, of course, without getting too technically legal here, there are a great deal of reforms that it is undertaking, and the technical legality of such reforms remains a matter of constitutional debate, given that the former prime minister had revoked the authority of, through constitutional amendment, revoked the authority of interim governments to, carry out a function during transitional periods. So, I mean, but by and large, I think, the question is of substantive legality rather than technical legality, and most people in Bangladesh have accepted its mandate, and the mandate it is undertaking to reform. I would just like to correct in relation to Bangladesh not being willing to restore ties with India, and that the problem is that in the most recent visit that the Sheikh Hasina had in 2024 to India was followed by an India-Bangladesh shared vision for future. Now, if you look at this joint statement, it mentions mutual cooperation for Tista and that Bangladesh would work with India's assistance, but not once does it mention the long-standing need for a water-sharing agreement on Tista, which has been a subject for almost every bilateral meeting between the then Prime Minister and Indian officials from 2011 onwards. So that was also seen as a great betrayal that after 14 years of constant pushing, that this joint statement that sought to build a joint vision even omits a mention of water sharing agreement. It's important to note that it mentioned the renewal of the Ganges Treaty, for instance. So that was seen as a crucial omission. So I would say it's actually quite inaccurate to say that India has done everything it can in this regard. In fact, what seems to be the case is a systematic attempt to suppress any such agreement from arising.
Okay, Vivek, I'll give you a right of a reply in just a moment, but I want to bring in Filippo once again. You mentioned, Filippo, the impact that climate change is having on the Tista. What environmental impact does reduced water flow have further downstream in Bangladesh? Are there any ways of mitigating this reduced water flow, the building of reservoirs, for instance?
The main impacts are a loss of biodiversity. The Teesta River is already a river that is heavily built and used up, if you want. building new reservoirs is not likely to solve the problem, at least when we talk about environmental loss and environmental degradation. Usually, building new reservoirs will do the opposite because you keep altering the, if you want, natural water flow of a river. We're talking about a river that is heavily dammed already. I think the issue at hand here is it's about finding ways to maybe restore it and bring it back to, I don't want to say its original state, let the river freely flow, at least a bit more than it can do now. Usually, based also on what happens in other river basins, building more infrastructure, particularly in a context where there is already heightened tension between two countries, is not going to solve any issue. The main issue here is that there is no long-term agreement over the sharing of these waters, and all the infrastructures that have been built already, what they do, they keep straining the relations.
Vivek, you mentioned the issue of India's security. Why is New Delhi so opposed to any involvement by China in any of these hydroelectric projects on the river in Bangladesh?
Because it will impact our security. We are aware of the relationship between India and China. Our concerns about China are known to all our neighbors. But before I venture further into this aspect, let me say that I was wanting to avoid any debate with my Bangladeshi colleague on the panel on this issue of domination and subservience. But I am constrained to say, because he's said it repeatedly, this idea that India was a dominant power and treated Bangladesh in a subservient manner is simply incorrect. If you look at the totality of the relationship, India has gone out of its way in economic, commercial, diplomatic aspects. We've resolved issues. In connectivity, we've done what we can. In power, Bangladesh is deficient in power. We've tried to help as best as we can. Are these aspects of domination? Now, there is, and let me be totally candid here, there is a psychological aspect between a smaller state and a contiguous neighboring state which is much larger. And this is perhaps more acute in the case of Bangladesh, given the geographical situation between the two countries. But I think it's not fair on the part of Bangladeshi colleagues to allege that India behaves in a manner that is, say, it seeks to arm twist. No. Okay. As far as waters are concerned, let me just say one particular fact.
Please, quickly, sir. We're running out of time.
Yes, just one sentence. We are acutely aware of the difficulties of lower riparians because we ourselves are both upper riparians and lower riparians. As we speak, Brahmaputra, which is the main lifeline of the eastern part of India and which will impact Bangladesh. On that river, the Chinese are building perhaps the world's largest dam ever. And I haven't heard my Bangladesh colleagues say a word on that aspect.
Okay. Taqbir, do you want to respond? Are India's concerns about China's involvement in Bangladesh legitimate? Does Bangladesh understand those concerns?
Of course, Bangladesh understands, and it has no desire to get involved in this Indo-China Cold War. What Bangladesh is interested in is safeguarding the human rights of its people. And why should it continue to let India's security interests, whether legitimate or whether it's a matter of hysteria, why should it continue to let that dictate the terms of to what extent its people in the north should be able to enjoy human rights. So this idea that this is like a psychological sense of subservience, I would invite anyone to conduct a holistic review of the agreements and, relations between India and Bangladesh in the past 15 years. And anyone with a reasonable sense of fairness and equality will come to the resounding conclusion that it was a highly relationship of subservience and dominance.
Filippo.
That's a totally subjective view.
Okay. In what way, sir?
It is because it is contrary to facts. If you see the history of India-Bangladesh relations beginning with 1971, I find that my colleague is focusing only on the last 15 years. Why not go back to 1971? I don't know, perhaps he's much too young. He doesn't recall what happened in 1971. We shed our blood in 1971. Let me complete. And if you see the history of it's more than 50 years, it is not domination and subservience. It's a question of two sovereign equals.
Okay.
That is the relationship that we've always wanted, and we've worked for it.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. We're almost out of time. I want to give the last word to Filippo here. Each situation, of course, Filippo, is unique. But as climate change continues to impact the world's natural resources, we're only likely to see more disputes like this one in the future, aren't we?
Yes. In short, yes. And usually what is going to happen is that large dams or large hydraulic infrastructure is going to be portrayed as the solution to our climate change concerns, while it isn't. They aren't always. But indeed, water is going to be under stress, increasingly so. And we are going to see more of these sort of concerns and even conflicts over shallow waters. I wouldn't say we're going to have water wars, as it was implied at the beginning, but clearly water is going to be ever more central in the political and, let's say, high political debate and diplomatic issues globally, not only in South Asia.
Okay, there, gentlemen, I'm afraid we're going to have to end it. Taqbir Huda, Filippo Menga and Vivek Katju, many thanks indeed for being with us on Inside Story. And thank you for watching. You can see the programme again at any time by going to the website at aljazeera.com. For further discussion, join us at our Facebook page, which you'll find at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. And you can join the conversation on X, our handle there, at AJ Inside Story. From me, Adrian Finighan, and the team here in Doha. We'll see you again. Bye for now.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.